Alan here with DustyHikers.com. I'm still in the Big Bend National Park. I'm here at the Santa Elena Canyon. We're about to do this hike. It's like a 2-mile hike in to go see this amazing rock formation canyon where the river cuts right through. On one side is Mexico and one side is the US. So what I want to talk to you all today about was whether or not you should use a guide service to go hiking. It's a really important decision. I had never used a guide service until last year, 2019, when I did a 5-day Ausangate trek in Peru. And so I think there's certain times when it makes sense to use a guide service. So one thing that I did was, on my blog, I created a decision tool that has a series of questions. And so if you answer yes to those questions, you start racking up points. And if you get enough points, then my suggestion is that you should probably use a guide service in that situation. So to go and find that decision tool, you should go to Google. You should Google when should you use a guide service for hiking, decision tool, and then just type in DustyHikers.com in the search, and then you should find my blog post on the first page. In there, I break down all of the things that you need to consider when you're deciding whether or not to use a guide service. So just a few of those are, the first one is, are you unfamiliar with the hike? So if you don't know the hike, that in of itself is not a really big deal, but if you start adding on some of the other things that I want you to think about in deciding whether or not to use a guide, then you can see how these things start to add up, right? So if you're unfamiliar with the hike, you're out of shape, you don't know how to navigate, you don't have proper equipment, all of those things start to add up to the point where maybe if you're going to do this hike, you either need to spend more time planning, or maybe you could just get a guide service and they can take you through the hike. Another question to ask yourself is the hike genuinely considered strenuous or difficult? So again, if you answer yes to this, that doesn't mean that you can't do the hike, but what it does mean is that you need to think about whether or not this is the hike for you. Another consideration is, does the hike require special permits that you don't have and that are difficult to acquire? So if you have, let's say, a 1-week vacation coming up in 4 months and you want to go hike the Grand Canyon, then it may be that to get a permit to go hike the Grand Canyon requires 6 months advance notice, whereas if you get a guide service, they might have a spot for you on their docket 4 months from now. So that might be a time when it's just easier to get a guide service, because then you get access to the permit that you need that you can't get for another year. The question to ask yourself when considering whether or not to use a guide service is whether or not you lack the equipment required to do this hike. So if your hike involves staying out overnight and backpacking, and you don't have a tent, you don't have all of the equipment that you're going to need to be able to do this, and you're not sure whether you want to get into hiking and backpacking, then maybe going and getting a guide service is a good way to kind of dip your toe into this and be able to go and actually do a hike and maybe even learn something from the guides. And there's many more questions on my blog. So if you Google should I use a guide service to go hiking, decision tool, and then Dusty Hikers, you can go and find all of these considerations or questions that I pose. The last one I want to talk about is whether the hike is in a foreign country with customs or permits or a language that you don't understand. In those cases, explain some of the things about the hike that maybe I wouldn't know from a guidebook, and it just takes all of the guesswork out of it. I mean, if you're somebody who really wants to spend a lot of time researching and planning, then by all means go do a hike in a foreign country in a place where you don't speak the language. But a guide service can sort of just take away all of the complications that come with hiking in a foreign country on a hike you've never been on, and especially if there's anything involved as far as technical equipment. I mean, we were on a 5-day hike, so obviously we needed tents, sleeping pads, sleeping bags. Someone needed to plan for all of the food, and so by getting a guide service, it was a lot easier for us, and I could just enjoy the hike with my son, going up to 17,000 feet plus over the passes, and just enjoying being outside in Peru. Thank you. I'm going to close the video here. If you are interested in hiking and hiking techniques and gear reviews, go check out dustyhikers.com. Thank you.